and welcome back to Rising. I have the thrill of being joined again at the desk by Shermichael Singleton, who is filling in for Robbie while he's on vacation, traversing the ruins of the Roman Empire. How many times a day do you think of the Roman Empire?
I got to tell you, I'm a little jealous of Robbie. I mean, that's a fun trip, Bree. But, Robbie, I'm happy to be sitting in for him. Bree, it's good to be back with you. I mean, last week we had a ball.
We did have a ball.
And I think the next few days are going to have a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, Shermichael, we have a good schedule up ahead of us. A new round of 2024 polling, again, spelling out trouble, warning signs for the Democrats. In a 2024 generic matchup, President Biden trails behind former President Donald Trump by a whopping 10 percentage points in a new ABC News Washington Post poll. The Washington Post makes it a point to say that this poll is likely an outlier. Quote, although the sizable margin of Trump's lead in this survey is significantly at odds with other public polls that show the general election contest a virtual dead heat. The difference between this poll and others, as well as the unusual makeup of Trump and Biden's coalitions in this survey, suggests it is probably an outlier. According to Larry Sabato of Sabato's Crystal Ball, however, there's nothing to see here. He says the polling is a ridiculous outlier.
I'm not sure if many people agree with Dr. Sabato, but why are voters so dissatisfied with Biden in this survey? The survey points to the growing discontent over the president's handling of the economy and immigration, a rising share of the public saying the United States is doing too much to aid Ukraine in its war with Russia, and broad concerns about his age as he seeks a second term. Meanwhile, over at NBC News, a separate poll spelled out more warning signs for the Biden camp. Let's check in.
This, as our new poll shows, the president's approval among black voters is down 17 points since the first year of his presidency. Mr. Biden is also down by double digits among Latinos, voters without a college degree, and independents. And as we mentioned, 59% of Democratic primary voters tell us they want to see a challenger to President Biden.
What the polling does appear conclusive on is that voters are over the idea of another Biden-Trump matchup. Survey respondents told NBC they had major concerns over the health and age of the two leading candidates. White House spokesman Ian Sams said on the recent polling rounds. Meanwhile, in other polling news, NBC finds that people oppose House Republicans' impeachment stunt by nearly 20 points, 39% support, 56% oppose, and by 13 points say backing impeachment makes them less likely to support their congressperson. Ooh, okay. Bree, this is a nightmare.
This is a nightmare. I wonder what you make of this idea that most people don't want a Biden-Trump matchup. And yet, even though Republicans are having an open primary, unlike Democrats, polls still suggest that in that context, Trump is still pulling ahead. You guys have an option. Why is nobody picking an option other than Donald Trump?
I mean, because I think most have recognized and have found it to be conclusive that Trump is nearly impossible to beat in the Republican primary. I mean, Trump is arguably, with his 37%, you add some who are sort of in the middle, if you will, that gives the guy close to 60%. If every single Republican dropped out of the race, Donald Trump would still be ahead if he only had one matchup by at least 15 percentage points. I find that to be uncoverable.
Yeah, I mean, it's
unrecoverable, I should say.
A little bit of a circular logic. I mean, is it just a candidate choice issue at the end of the day that the presumed front runner against Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, hasn't been able to tap into something real, that the predictions that when he became more prominent on the public stage and people actually heard the words coming out of his mouth and his voice, he just wasn't that likable. He didn't seem to have that energy. He didn't inspire confidence in the same way Donald Trump had.
I think Governor DeSantis should have waited until 2028. That was always my position. I think that most Republican voters want to give Donald Trump a second chance. Regardless of what your views may be on the 2020 election results, many people think that he should have been reelected. Many Republicans don't think the election was fair. I'm not saying I believe that. That's what many voters believe. And so with that in mind, they want him to return to the White House. And I think, Bree, a lot of Americans probably, I would argue, want to see Trump return, at least from an economic perspective. Maybe they dislike the tweets, they dislike the rash behavior, the unpredictability. But I think there's buyer's remorse with Joe Biden. Joe Biden was supposed to merely be a placeholder, in part because of the COVID pandemic. A lot of things went wrong with the economy. I understand why people wanted someone else. But Biden went in and he's tried, in my opinion, to have a very progressive agenda. I think most Americans are center-leaning. He selected a vice president that is highly unpopular, did not win a single contest during the primary, didn't even have substantial support among black voters. Yet the guise was that we're choosing her because we need black voters. I don't know how that makes any logical sense. And so I think when you break all of those layers down, people are saying, you know, you were merely to be a placeholder for 4 years. That's it. You went too far. We want somebody else. And that somebody else happens to be Donald Trump.
I mean, I think all of that is true, except for the polls suggest that people don't want a Biden-Trump matchup. It's not just about Joe Biden.
But when you asked him about Trump, Trump is doing better than Biden.
Well, I think that Trump has more enthusiasm among his base than Biden does. But this poll I'm looking at from Axios, 88% of Democrats say they definitely probably will vote for Biden if he's the nominee. So I do think Democrats, and I don't think this is a positive attribute. I think it's part of why we never get, or the Democrats never get good candidates. But they are very vote blue no matter who. At the end of the day, no matter how distasteful it is, they'll pull the lever for Biden. And Biden, for all of his faults, most of the reason why Democrats don't want him to be the candidate, it's not really substantive. It's largely because he's old. Donald Trump has some cohort, some meaningful cohort of the Republican Party who's over the indictments, over the messiness, the personal scandals, the having to have a discussion with your kids about the porn star, all that stuff. It's just people are over having to deal with it. And so he has, I think, a much fierier base, but also this hunk of disaffected people as well. I want to talk about some of the discrete populations that Biden is struggling with for a second. He's down double digits with both Latino and black voters and independents. All cohorts and young voters. We talked about this a few weeks ago, that there was a poll that nobody really discussed that showed that Marianne Williamson is barely behind Biden with young voters. I mean, they're neck and neck in the 30s, if I recall correctly. So, you know, to what do you attribute that, and do you think there's any recovering from that?
I mean, I think when Trump ran in 2020, I believe he received around 37% of the Latino vote. That can't be overlooked. His numbers with black voters, particularly black men, he did better than John McCain, better than Mitt Romney. So say whatever you want to say about Donald Trump, but clearly there is an appeal there. And I think for men, generally speaking, this idea of strength does resonate with a lot of men, regardless of race. And I think a lot of black men and a lot of Latino men do not feel that they're properly represented by the Democratic Party. I just think it's true. And when you go to many barbershops across the country, you hear everything about women, and I don't have anything against women. I think, you know, women are important just as men are, but not to the effect that men shouldn't have our priorities met. Oftentimes, Bree, we've seen this interesting conversation within the black community, in particular, about black women being more college educated than black men, and black men not doing enough to be responsible in the community. And I think there's a growing segment of black men saying, wait a minute here, that's not necessarily true. And then you have Republicans who are saying, well, we're pro-men, and we're going to stand up for masculine values and masculinity. That resonates not only with me as a college-educated man who happens to be black, but I think it resonates with a lot of men, white, black, Latino, Asian, who are college-educated and who aren't college-educated.
So I think that I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I think that obviously you're right about the polls and Trump having more appeal than other Republicans with black male voters in particular. It is worth knowing that is still a very small number. I think it's like in the low teens of black men that voted for Donald Trump, with 80+% still voting for the Democratic Party. But I do think that what Trump accurately tapped into was a resentment that black voters have with the Democratic Party. Because I do agree with the piece that you said about the Democratic Party ignoring the needs and interests of black people, and specifically black men. I do think that there is a way that the rhetoric has largely centered around issues like maternal health rate. I think that black women have been really core to a lot of the organizing efforts, and there has been historically an erasure of black women from civil rights efforts and the like. And so there has been perhaps an overcorrection.
So? Yeah. I don't, as a black man, I don't see that. I think everything has been about and centered around black women.
I'm saying historically. So in the 1960s and 70s,
but what about now, though?
Well, that's what I'm describing, is that now there's been an overcorrection by black women who felt dismissed about them in the 1960s and 70s. So and that has resulted in some black men, and I've had many conversations with black men casually in the world, where they feel this resentment about being ignored. And when Joe Biden says things like, I'm not going to give you a black agenda, you simply ain't black. He said this to Charlemagne the God's face. If you don't vote for me,
who are
then
you?
that resentment has to go somewhere. And then Donald Trump heard what was going on and said out loud, what has the Democratic Party done for you lately? He Janet Jacksoned it, and he was right.
He was right. I mean, if you go to any major black urban city across the country, crime is rampant. You look at economics, jobs are really not, frankly, there. The infrastructure is terrible, and most of these cities have been led by Democrats for decades. So it's like, why would I keep, as a black person, continue to vote for the same party over and over and over again, and the results have remained the same for 50 years? Now, I'm not saying Republicans are necessarily perfect. That's not what I'm saying at all. I think people should vote for Republicans that they do believe meet their expectations and their specific agenda for that individual community. But I think to continue to do the same thing over and over again is the definition of insanity. And so to the point that you raised, though, about Trump having support in the low teens with black men, which I believe is around 12%, Bree, that 12% may seem insignificant. But if Biden sees if the decrease that we're looking at maintains for Biden, and some of those battleground states, of black men just staying home, completely disengaging from the process, that is absolutely beneficial to Donald Trump, because I believe that 12% could potentially become 13. And even if it remains 12, I think they'll turn out.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what the actual outcome is. Yeah. I think we ran out of time talking about this stuff, but we'll have a lot more on some other polls that have some interesting things pretended about third-party candidates after this. Stick around, more Rising coming up.